Hello and welcome to the first of many extras we have in store for you at this year's Out for Blood Film Festival. My name is Sam Whitaker, and today I'm joined by some fantastic filmmakers from across the globe for a panel discussion on all things horror. We'll be learning more about some of the films at this year's festival, whilst also talking about all-important representation in film and TV. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to just learn a bit about each of our filmmakers. So we're just going to get your name, pronouns, and a little bit about the film that you've made. So first of all, if we can go to Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah Mae Cumming, she, her pronouns. I wrote and co-directed and co-produced Camp Calypso, which is a retro summer camp creature featurette about a misogynistic summer camp and the man-eating vengeful siren that lives in the lake.
Fantastic. And let's go over to Karlee from your team.
Yeah, I'm Karlee. I also use she, her pronouns, and I helped direct and produce Camp Calypso.
Fabulous. And then we'll go over to Madison now, please.
Hi, my name is Madison Kennedy. I use she, her pronouns, and I directed Shattered, which is about three women who reconnect after a couple years because their darkest secret has come back up.
Spooky. Okay, and now over to N, please.
Hi, I'm Nelson-Correria. I use they, them pronouns, and I directed and animated In the Deep, which is about a pirate couple who kind of like fall into the depths, if you will. And it's inspired by like internal struggle and loss and all that good spooky stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And then if we can go to January.
Hi, I'm January, she, her pronouns. I wrote and directed Lone Wolf, which is a coming-of-age story set at a sleepover. It deals with themes of puberty, same-sex attraction, but it's ultimately a love story between two young girls.
Fantastic. Sleepovers, terrifying, so already there.
I had a phobia of sleepovers growing up, which I think is like where this all came from. I couldn't sleep at other people's houses, so...
Yeah, I really, when I watched your film, I was like, it's happening again. It's happening again. It's terrible. Flashbacks. And finally, Leila, please introduce yourself.
I'm Leila, she, her pronouns, and I'm very proud to say that I-RIS, a short film I wrote and directed, was voted last year's best film. And it's a sci-fi horror in a world where people can get eye implants to adjust what they see. Complications with one girl's operation causes her trauma to manifest visually.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure to have you back, Leila. Obviously, it'd be much better if we could see you all in person, as we did last year, but this is a great step forward to ensuring that we still have this community feel with panels. We've also got talks and a lot going on during this year's festival, which is a step towards community when we're so distant. So anyway, on with the show. I should probably introduce myself, actually. So I'm Sam Whitaker, they, them pronouns. I'm the festival director of Out for Blood. And I haven't made a film in a very long time. The last film I made was a film called Milk. And it was a vegan, feminist, queer, sci-fi, horror movie about aliens coming to Earth and taking women's milk. As you do.
Drop the link, though.
Let's go into our first question. So, fairly big question, not going to give you an easy start. What is one piece of advice you would give to any up-and-coming filmmakers, or even someone who's never even picked up a camera, but they want to make some films? And we're going to go to Leila first.
Yeah, so If you've never picked up a camera before, I would really emphasize that filmmaking is a very collaborative process, and my advice is to find others who also want to make stuff with you. Even if you're all doing it for the first time, it's just so much fun to work together, to learn together, and to get that practice and support with a group of people, because there's going to be so many frustrations, so many challenges, and to have that group of people who can support you along the way as you're all figuring things out, that's so much more important than the technical stuff, which you can learn online and nowadays.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. Thank you very much, Leila. Let's go over to January next.
So I would say probably the same thing. I think finding your community is so important because, yeah, like I said, you very rarely can make a film on your own. You need other people to do it. So I would say if you can, if you don't have like people that are into film around you, try looking at short courses, what groups are around you, and join and crew on other people's films. I think that's a great way of, starting out. Just like be a runner, be anything, and, make some friends, and then you get, and everyone helps each other out. Then you work on other people's films and just try lots of different roles and give it a go.
Absolutely. I like this community feel, bringing in the love at this difficult time. Community is so important, and in filmmaking it's key. Yeah, thank you. Over to Madison.
This sounds so simple, but just make something. I think there's a lot of people that they're like, oh, I really want to be a filmmaker. Oh, I really want to make films. But I think the best way to improve yourself is just to make things. Like, don't get caught in the preparation phase of things. I always doubt myself, and it's never going to go away, really. I talk to people that are much older, have been in the industry forever, and they still have those feelings of like, oh, am I like good enough to be doing this? Is this ready enough? But at a certain point, you just got to let go of that and just do the thing, because that's the only way you're going to get better. And to echo what January said, like, help other people. Like, if you're like, oh, I don't have any resources, help other people, and people will want to help you back. It's like a community giving sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of, if you've never done it before, just do it. Give it a go.
Just do it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something kind of punk rock about that as well. Like, I don't know how to play this guitar, but I'm going to learn. I'm going to do it. And yeah, that's
hell yeah.
Actually like horror films, right?
Yeah, especially.
En, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd say for like animation, it's kind of the same. I know a lot of programs have like free trials. So even if you just want to make something super short, super simple, you could just get like your computer, download the thing, and you could just make like a 30-second something. You could record it, you could animate it, and just put it together, and you have that. And if you do have other friends, again, that are into it and that want to make things, it's really nice to have them around to like, look at my film, let me look at yours, or like help each other. It's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, just do it.
I love that you're like, oh, just a 30-second animation, which would take,
I
don't think how long.
Well, I'm thinking also if you just record it too, you could record something with your phone. Like if you want to make something live action in that case, but animation, it might be a little bit shorter if you want to make something low pressure, really short, just do it.
Yeah, lovely. Over to Karlee or Hannah, or both of you want to take this one?
I'll go. I definitely, I like the whole just do it kind of thing. I think that's a really great way to go with any kind of creative project. I think also just like having faith in the project and making sure that you're telling a story that you're passionate about, because no matter what kind of resources you had to make that, if you're passionate about it and really care about the story and the characters, that's going to come through more than anything else.
Yeah, I would agree. And also what you guys were saying about community, like for us, our crew on our films were our friends, and like our whole friend group is kind of centered around making these horror films together. And like we're each writing one, and you know, each going to direct one, and we're all going to work on them. And I think that's like a perfect setup for creatives to just be surrounded by creatives and supporting each other. And I also just think, you know, don't give up on yourself. We made a film 2 years ago that wasn't really seen by a lot of people for a really long time. And recently it just got like a lot of attention. And I think the success of that is really because we just stood by our project and we kept like pushing it and promoting it, and we didn't give up on it. And so, yeah, definitely just believe in yourself until you get the recognition you think you deserve.
Yeah. And I love how wholesome that was. Like, keep believing in yourself, but you deserve this as well.
Yeah, you do.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, who are your horror icons and why? It could be a director, a composer, an animator, actor, or even just a character. Shall we go over to January first?
So growing up, it was every single final girl was my horror icon. I know there's a lot of, and I guess we'll probably talk about this later, but there's a lot of criticism about horror being anti-feminist and things like that. But for me, I found it was the one genre where like women really kicked ass and, you know, survived and went through, you know, these amazing things. And, you know, I just loved that as a young person. And in terms of directors, Karen Kasuma and my fellow Australian Jennifer Kent are probably two of my big horror icons at the moment.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, Final Girls. There's so many, and they're so fantastic in their own rights. But I just said it's a very interesting conversation, and maybe we'll get to that a bit later about, you know, were those portrayals always as good as we would hope? And even if they weren't, what did people get from it? And is it what people who relate to those characters get from a film? So yeah, thanks for opening that up. Let's go to Madison next.
So I read this question and I was like, I don't think either of the people I'm about to say are strictly horror, but they do influence a lot of what I like and what I try to do. So David Fincher and Jordan Peele, I think they're just both brilliant in their own rights. So I try to look at what they do, both technically and just, I just watch so many interviews. I don't know if anyone else does that, but I'll just have YouTube on in the background while I'm doing stuff and just watch interviews of people talking about their process. And I just think both of them are so brilliant. If you watch their stuff, every time you watch, you know, one of their films, you notice things that you didn't before. And if you try to analyze it, you know, as a filmmaker too, you're like, holy shit, that was so smart. Like, I know how that made me feel, but I didn't know why I was feeling that way. But now I'm looking at, okay, like this is how, you know, he's moving the camera in this moment, and that's why I'm feeling that way. And that's the craziest thing to me. So that's, you know, I really admire both of them. And then as far as characters go, Ripley from Alien is a fucking badass, like my heart. So that's definitely that.
Nice that I had a bit of a yes, Ripley, and then I looked over to the side because I actually got an Alien poster just over here. I wouldn't know because I don't think you'll be able to see it from the reflection because I've got a big bulb here. But yeah, I'm a huge Ripley, Sigourney Weaver fan. Yeah, more Alien, please. On to N.
Yeah, so when I first read this question too, the first thing that came in my mind was the movie Jennifer's Body. And like when it first came out, I didn't appreciate it, but I rewatched it like a couple years ago And I was like, oh, this movie is why I am the way I am today. So like Jennifer and Needy, like their relationship is so like integral to me as a person. I feel like I can't get away with not bringing that movie up at any possible opportunity.
Yeah,
And
I could go on a tangent about Jennifer's Body. Maybe I will later. For now, I'll save you all. However,
we can talk.
Like I had the same response. I watched it. To be fair, I think I was probably about 17 maybe when I watched it. I was like, Megan Fox, and I didn't appreciate it. And now I look back and I'm like, you're such a fool, because it's excellent, and it speaks to so many people, so many queer people. And yeah, Jennifer's Body, check it out, everybody. Okay.
And one of the sorry.
No, go.
Oh, one of the co-directors is also Karen Kusama, who January brought up.
Mm-hmm.
And another director I really like and wanted to mention was, I'm not sure if he's like strictly horror, but I really love how Bong Joon-ho did Parasite.
Yes.
And how he framed it like as a thriller almost. It's just like so good. I love that movie too.
Yeah, and I really love that crossover between horror and thriller. And I think, many people are like, oh, it's thriller, it's horror, separate. No, they're totally entwined. And I think it's, with especially Parasite, the way that was done, there were definitely elements of horror in that. There were definitely moments I was like, no, I don't want to. So yeah, fantastic example there. Now then, on to Leila.
Yes, I was struggling to think of who my icons were, because I feel like a lot of my favorite films don't necessarily come from strictly horror film directors. But if I'm going to be basic, I love a John Carpenter 80s synth moment. And I also really like David Cronenberg practical effects. I'm like a sucker for some crazy practical effects. And I was also trying to think of some female directors, and I feel like Anna Biller, who did The Love Witch, is really approaching icon territory. I know for her next film, she wants to do one that is like a strictly horror film, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it weird to say I love The Love Witch? Yeah, fantastic example again. I watched that a while ago now, but it's really stuck with me ever since. Yeah, thank you. On to Karlee.
Yeah, I feel like Leila just snatched all of my picks over here. Good taste. Yeah, I mean, I'm also very, very big fan of body horror. So Cronenberg is definitely up there for me. I love a crazy, just gross out practical effects moment. I also really, I would say just in general for inspiration, really anything from like the 70s or 80s, it's going to be kind of up my alley. Definitely a big Wes Craven fan too. His stuff from like the 70s, even into like modern, Scream and everything. I just really like the way he kind of intertwines comedy and horror and satire just all together. And he just obviously has such an expansive career. He's done everything. Yeah, I would say those are at least a few of them. Anna Biller as well. I love Anna Biller, and I don't even, The Love Witch wasn't really like strictly horror, but I definitely aspire to have that level of aesthetic to any project I create, for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, like if it was easy making films look that good,
everyone would do it.
Yeah, fantastic. And Hannah, do you want to add anything? Any suggestions?
Yeah, well, 70s films are my shit, so anything from the 70s. Anna Biller as well. I love her approach to filmmaking and how she, you know, just the whole retro aesthetic. I also love her other film, Viva. But I guess like icons, Dario Argento is my favorite director. I love Jordan Peele and how he, with Get Out, kind of took tropes and subverted them. And just icons in general. Tim Curry, love Tim Curry so much. And Richard O'Brien, who like wrote Rocky Horror as well. Kirby from Scream 4 was like the first horror character I've like felt like I really related to on a spiritual level, apart from Mary Lou Maloney from Hello, Mary Lou, Prom Night 2. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's like a queer horror classic.
It's been on my list for a long time.
Oh, you will love it.
Oh yeah, you gotta check it out for sure.
What's it on? What streaming platform?
I think it's on Shudder and Tubi right now.
Okay.
And then R.L. Stine as well. I love Goosebumps. I want to make kids horror one day. Goosebumps is a big inspo for me.
Yeah, same. Love that genre. I love the silliness of and the campness of horror. So yeah, I love a bit of Goosebumps. And also, is it he did Fear Street as well?
Fear Street. They're releasing 3 movies, female directed, based on the Fear Street books. They were supposed to come out this summer, but they're coming out next summer.
Fantastic.
So excited.
I actually, I think maybe over in the US it's a bit more of a known series of books. What is it? Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously the film came out, was it last year, I believe? And I was like, what is this? Why have I never heard of it? So I actually just recently went through and read all the stories, and I just felt like a child again, just sniggering to myself reading these stories.
One of my earliest memories is crying because I read the one about the green string.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
My parents about that, like horrifying.
Yeah.
I don't know why my mom bought me those books. They're terrifying. I was like a baby.
I remember reading them in my elementary school library, just like
It's the illustrations as well. The illustrations are terrifying.
Yeah, the illustrations are scarier than the
Did
stories
you see the movie?
most of the time.
Like I
saw the movie.
Sometimes I don't feel like it, but I am a grown adult, and I read them for the first time this year. But there were 1 or 2 that made me want to keep the bedside light on. Anyway, on to the next thing. Why do we, or people in general, love horror? Why are we drawn to it, in your opinion? And let's start with Madison.
So for me specifically, I mean, talking from my perspective as a woman, as a queer woman, I think there's a lot of things to be afraid of as a woman, as a queer woman. You know, like walking home at night, or not having control over your body, or being, you know, in public with your partner and being afraid of that. I think there's so many things to be fearful of. So taking control of that and doing what you want with it, especially when writing, it's like, oh, okay, well, you know, this could happen, but also the guy could die, and oops, like, it's fine. It's something about it is like so satisfying, and so it makes me feel so powerful. And I think that's really what drew me to horror. And then, you know, what January said earlier, I feel like horror is really a genre where women just kick ass, and that's what I aspire to be. I mean, going back to Ripley, it's like, hell yeah, like, I want to do that. Like, I want to fucking fight an alien in space. So I think it's just it's a fun playground to have control over as a genre.
Awesome. Yeah, and I love how Ripley is the very essence of queer horror icon. You know, she's fighting this horrific monster, trying to escape, but saving the cats.
Of course.
Aspire
Of course. It's the stereotype, but I love it.
Thank you, Madison. Okay, over to January.
Yeah, so for me personally, I think I got into horror initially as a young person because of the thrill. But then once you get past that and you realize there's so much more going on and there's so much more that can be explored. I mean, fear is such a primal thing in all of us. And as a genre, I think it's so fascinating to see societal and cultural fears explored, especially, and usually through metaphor, usually through these really clever, interesting ways, like through zombies or vampires or, you know what I mean, body horror. And I just find that like fascinating. So that's where my love kind of comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all relate to that in our own ways. And it goes back to what Madison was saying, you know, all these societal fears that we just unfortunately have because, you know, and yeah, horror is like an escape, but it's also directly talking about those things that maybe in other genres, it's not. I find in other genres it can be a bit too real.
Yeah.
A bit too.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you can easily make a film about the AIDS crisis on like that level of like, this is what's happening and these are the people that are dying. But, you know, then you can make like a vampire movie about people sharing blood and the effect of that. And you know what I mean? You can explore it on this really smart level where, you know, there's two sides to it. And I think that's what I find like the most fascinating is, you know, in most good horror films, there's always something else going on. There's always another story being told. It's not just like gore and splatter and killing and, you know what I mean? There's something deeper to it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. I think when I talk to some of my film friends, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing this horror film festival, and they're like, horror. Like this, it's so much deeper and more impactful than you think.
I just think people that don't like horror aren't very smart. No, just kidding.
It's fine. Anyone watching this loves horror. Fantastic. And let's go over to Leila.
So I was trying to think of some like complex, deep answer to this question, but at the end of the day, I love the spectacle of horror. It's fun, it's cathartic, and I feel like it's a safe realm to explore all the full range of human emotions.
To the point, exactly. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Leila. And over to Hannah.
Well, as a queer woman, I just feel like horror belongs to us. F.W. Murnau was supposedly gay. Mary Shelley was a woman. Like from the very beginning, horror was ours and it was made for us. And I think it lost its way down the line, but I know it just holds a special place in a lot of queer people's hearts, and as does like camp and horror are really linked as well. So
Absolutely. Horror has always been queer. No more questions. but I think I might be making this up. I don't have the actual info here, but I'm sure that I recently heard that before the novel Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, that there was another story by I don't know who, so I could be making this up, and it was essentially the first, before Dracula, vampire story, and it was basically lesbian vampires. So
my favorite.
Camilla?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is it Camilla?
Is it Camilla?
Yeah, probably.
Probably.
If you want to go on like a 70s lesbian vampire run, there's so many good like sexy adaptations of Camilla, where it's just women vampires seducing women.
Yeah,
Blood Splattered Bride is a favorite of mine.
Which one's yours, Leila?
Blood Splattered Bride.
Yeah, Leila actually did a fantastic illustration inspired by that.
Yeah.
For we had a zine last year, obviously with things going on. We're not, sadly not creating a zine this year, because we thought it was too much risk. And anyway, but last year, Leila did this fantastic little piece. If I find it in this video when it goes up, there'll be a nice picture of it somewhere here, maybe. But yeah, I haven't actually seen it myself.
Go watch it.
I'm just going to start making a list. So shall we go to N next?
Yeah, I think I was into horror from like a very young age. And I think it started with my grandpa playing like horror video games, and I would always be like playing it, and then the scary part would come with the enemies, and I'm like, no, you play now. I don't want to do it, but I want to watch. But I can't play it because I'm sweaty and my hands are shaking. So can you do it for me? But like, I think watching that and feeling like the thrill and like how anxious I would get, I loved that feeling. And then when it was over, it was like, okay, I'm safe. And I feel like it's the same with horror movies or like books or comics. And it's always that same feeling. And I always want to come back to it and like experience that roller coaster all over again.
Yeah. It's funny you say about video games. So I was a late bloomer for horror. I mean, I was brought up in a Mormon household. It was very, things like horror were scary because horrible afterlife things do happen. So for me, I stayed very clear of it for a long time. But it was one of my friends, my good friend Jade, from back up north. I'm saying back up north, but you don't know where I'm from. So originally I was from the north of England, now I'm in the south. Anyway, and Jade was a huge horror fan, and Jade was the person who introduced me to things like Silent Hill, because that's a fun game to play when you're a kid. And then also introduced me to things like Rocky Horror Picture Show and Young Frankenstein and all these things, and it all went downhill from there.
Yeah, it definitely takes hold of you, and you're like, all I want to watch is horror. All I want to do.
Yeah,
it's like consume more, because it can go so out there in terms of themes too. There's like, what are the limits of horror?
Exactly, and that's talking of limits and themes. Like, that's definitely one of the things I really love about horror, because it's easy to say this is horror, there's a few things around it, but actually it's so vast, and horror is so subjective as well, right? So it depends who's watching and what is horror for them. I think for many people, especially people from minority groups, there's often a strong love-hate relationship with horror. What is one film that really got you into horror, and what is one film that maybe discouraged you from the genre, and why? And we're going to go to Karlee first.
Cool. Yeah. Well, first of all, one of the films that really got me into horror was It Follows. I was also I watched horror growing up, but It Follows when I was in my late teens is really what made me see it as more like an artistic form of film again, which I really loved. But I think definitely as a woman, more than anything, the misogyny in a lot of horror is pretty rampant, especially in, like I said, I love like classic 70s and 80s horror especially, which is definitely the worst of just misogyny and unnecessary, very like sexual, like just drawn out sex scenes and stuff, which I really don't like, and also a lot of very brutal, killings of women. So that's something that definitely has always kind of made me cringe at, and definitely makes me uncomfortable as a viewer at points. But yeah, it's just one of those things where it's so widespread, and so many of the horror films that everyone knows and loves, that it's one of those things where sometimes you just want to sweep it under the rug just to enjoy the film for what it is.
Yeah, I always laugh because whenever I'm giving like recommendations to friends, I'm like, oh yeah, this film's very good, that film's very good, but there is one bit in there that
it's like there always has to be a disclaimer, which I feel like that's something that I in my work specifically like don't want people to have to give. Like, I don't want someone to recommend one of my films and be like, oh, it's great, but there's this one part that's pretty problematic. We can just do away with all the problematic stuff and just
one
get
day.
into the horror.
That's a great answer, thank you. Okay, over to January.
So I want to start by saying, yeah, horror gets a bad rap, but personally I find romantic comedies probably the most offensive genre out there. And I find it's usually far more sexist, racist, and homophobic than any horror film. But having said that, I think one of my most impactful experiences with a horror film was when I watched Night of the Living Dead for the first time. And if anyone's seen that, you kind of know what happens. But yeah, I think it was the first time I realized that there's like so much more to this genre, and the final scene and what happens, and you realize like, oh my gosh, this is, and for me, like as a young person, that's when I realized there's far more going on. This isn't a film about just zombies. This is a film about so much more. And, having that kind of memory of it and realizing that was really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had a similar response to that film. I wasn't expecting it. Like, it's one of those films you know of the film, but when I finally got around to watching it as a young adult, I was blown away. I had no idea that it was going to take me there, and it feels so ahead of its time, right? Films like that are getting, slowly but surely getting made now.
Yeah.
We've done it back then.
Well, unfortunately, there's still so much work to be done, There's still, so many societal issues that need to be tackled. But yeah, I think that was like a horror film that I had a really strong emotional response to, especially the ending. And so that was it for me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's go to Hannah next.
I don't really know of like any particular film that discouraged me, but I think the Scream franchise really drew me to horror as a younger kid. I really like that it was super meta, and it was able to acknowledge the issues within the horror genre, some perpetuated by its own director, Wes Craven, in the 70s, at the beginning of his career, and kind of flipping a lot of tropes on its head, and just kind of like paving a way for a more progressive horror genre that was able to like laugh at itself and comment on its own issues.
Yeah, Wes, like Wes, I say it like we're buddies, old pals. Oh, Wes. Yeah, he's always been, I think someone said earlier about him having a keen sense of humor in his work. And then for him to get into the 90s and then basically take the piss out of everything he's done before was genius. New Scream movie coming
2022, a day after my birthday. You're all invited.
January 14th.
5 Cream. That's what we're trying to get it to be called, but they're probably
And almost everyone's coming back for it as well.
Praying
And
that
it signed on Samara Weaving, right?
Say again?
Did Samara Weaving get signed on?
No.
They were trying to get her on.
No, but Neve Campbell just signed on.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that they bring Kirby back somehow. Please bring her back.
I guess anything can happen in Scream.
True.
If we riot.
So let's go over to Leila next.
I feel like I was also a late bloomer with film because I grew up during that really extremely gory Saw era, and it was not visually appealing to me. It was just all like gray, dark. So that's what I just associated with horror. But then when I was getting older and I started really loving all the kind of thriller horror stuff, and I still didn't think of it as horror, but I think watching Carrie really opened like the floodgates of all that amazing older, campier stuff, and realizing what horror could be. That's not just all like torture stuff, but it's got a lot of suspense, it's got a lot of character depth, and just got a lot of like fun visuals as well.
Yeah. Talking of queer horror icons, that's a bombshell. Carrie. Yeah, everyone loves a bit of Carrie. I think there's a couple of films this year actually that reference Carrie. Actually, January, your film references Carrie. And yeah.
I watched that when I was I remember my mum like put that on for me to watch when I was pretty young, so I was quite familiar with that film growing up. She was like, the girls are so mean in this film, and I was like horrified. I was like, is this what high school's going to be like?
Mum's torturing all of us from a young age. Obviously, this panel is looking at the experiences and ideas of women and non-binary or gender non-conforming folks. Do you think horror is a good genre for exploring gender, and why? And we're gonna go over to Leila first.
Yeah, so I believe horror is the perfect genre for exploring the unknown, and that unknown can definitely include the complex relationships to our bodies, the spaces they inhabit, without the restrictions of other genres. By restrictions, I mean like it kind of move away from symbolism that horror really embraces, and that I feel is sometimes necessary for an expression of the kind of inner feelings that are difficult to just express with words. So it doesn't just tolerate challenges to social norms, it really celebrates them.
I think that's an excellent answer. Thank you very much, Leila. Now over to January.
Yeah, so I think any genre that deals in metaphor and symbolism is going to be a great way to explore a whole multitude of things. I mean, I can't really speak to the experience, like I'm a cisgendered woman, so I can't speak to the experience of non-binary or trans people exploring their gender through the genre, but I know like there's so many things, especially as a woman, that kind of come up in horror that, you know, I found at the moment I'm heavily pregnant, hiding it, but thank you. But, you know, I read Rosemary's Baby recently and watched, you know, the film. I know there's problematic feelings around the film, but the book is great. And it's, you know, it's amazing that a man wrote about what it's like to have women's bodies policed and, you know, that experience of pregnancy. And it's kind of one of the most realistic feelings of pregnancy and feeling out of control with your body that I've kind of come across, and that's been in horror. So out of all the pregnancy books I've read, it's probably the most relatable in a weird way.
Hopefully not too relatable.
No. But, you know, just this feeling of like all of a sudden, like other people are like in control of your body, like your body is almost like not your own anymore. And that kind of experience is really, really interesting. So
yeah, Rosemary's Babies, there's plural, terrifying. It's one of my favorite books, and you know, I've never been pregnant, it's not the life for me, but you know, I remember reading that and just feeling so much frustration because, you know, throughout that book and in the film, you know, Rosemary's like, there is something wrong. And people are going, don't be, you're just worrying, it's the hormones, you're pregnant, it'll be fine. You're just a woman.
Yeah.
And it's so infuriating, which I think everyone here can probably relate to in some way or another.
Yeah, I mean, how women's health is treated is ridiculous. You know, I can't even imagine what it's like for trans people and non-binary people, but even just being a woman is like the rate of how long it takes for endometriosis to get diagnosed. Like there's just, I mean, we could, you know, have a whole panel on that, but it's
next week when we
but yeah,
that's
crazy.
Yeah, spot on. Thank you very much. Okay, so now looking a little closer at representation, how do you think the representation of characters who are not just cis-het white men has changed over time in film, but horror movies, or alternatively, has it not changed, and how should filmmakers like yourselves be addressing this?
Yeah, so look, I think it's getting better, but we're still not there yet. I think we're starting to see, you know, more people of color, more women, but you know, in terms of the queer community, I think there's still a long way to go. But I think there is a genuine push for diversity, and I really hope that, you know, that is the direction we're going in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we mentioned earlier that we can see that change, some interesting different stories are coming out, which is fantastic. We just need more of it. I think some people are like, well, we did one black horror film this year, that's enough. It's like, no, like, let's really, don't get me started. Thank you. Let's go over to Karlee.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I really liked what you said just now about it's not, there's not going to be like a maximum that we're going to get to where we're just going to be like, okay, this is enough representation, we're good now, we're just going to go back to like white people's stories. It's going to be something that we're always going to be having to push for, and there's always going to be progress to be made. And I think, you know, Hannah and I were talking about this yesterday, like horror has always, you know, championed like, you know, women and POC just because of what horror is, which is, you know, exploring the unknown and exploring other people's perspectives. But I, you know, like we've said, I think there's still a lot of work to be done, especially behind the camera. I think in front of the camera with like characters and actors, I think we're definitely filling the gap, but I think it is going to start just being about who's actually behind the camera, writing the scripts, directing, whose like vision is it actually, because, you know, we can have queer characters and women in front of the screen, but maybe it's not as impactful as it would be if it was also directed and written and produced by queer women.
No, absolutely. I think, well, it's, you know, as we said, how do you make those changes when you need someone to help you first as well? And it's such a tangled web, isn't it? There's so much to be done. But ensuring that we, and going back to what we said earlier about community, right? Mm-hmm. Ensuring that we reach out to our communities and we go, hey, let's make a film together, and you know, and building up relationships to help each other with our films and with our stories, and also ensuring that, you know, if someone says, I want to make this film, it's not really about how you might identify, but I'm making this film and I want some help. It's making sure that you, as a person who doesn't identify as what that film is talking about, doesn't overstep your boundaries either. Like, that person is talking about their experiences. You need to listen and just support, and that's the best you can do. Okay, shall we go over to Hannah?
Same question. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we saw with the resurgence of remakes the past like 20 years that cishet men making movies, it's tired. I'm over it. I need something new. I need more perspectives. And I think it's happening. I think Jordan Peele really was one of the first filmmakers in recent years to just start championing that. And then obviously we were talking about Jennifer's Body and how that's been kind of like looked at again as a cult classic. So I definitely think we're on the right track. We just need to keep uplifting each other, and we need people like us in positions of power. Fangoria was recently purchased by two new owners. Sorry, my cat's being crazy right now. But two new owners, Tara Ansley, I think is how you pronounce her name, and then I don't know her partner's name, but they've said that they're going to be focused on like, you know, uplifting queer and women and people of color writers for the magazine, and they're going to start like making films more and championing marginalized creators. So that's definitely a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that news. Fangoria isn't as big a thing over in the UK, but obviously I've heard of it. It's, you know,
you guys have Scream Mag, which I also like.
But that's fantastic news. That's the steps we need to take. Over to Madison.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what everyone else has said, we're kind of getting, you know, in the right direction, but there's such a long way to go. And I think it's a consistent need to push, because I think people will have these, you know, 2020, people will have these periods of time where it's like, okay, like we're very passionate about this. And then after a while, people lose their, not everyone, but the general public loses that passion, and there's not as much pressure on institutions to hire inclusively. Something that I would love to see more of that I feel like we're not getting as much of is characters that are queer, but like that's not their storyline, like that's not their whole personality. When Love, Simon came out, everyone was like, oh my god, groundbreaking, huh? And I was like, okay. Like it was a good movie, but it's like, okay, great, like someone came out and it was difficult. All right, like, so not to invalidate anyone that has that experience that relates to that movie. I totally understand that, but I would love to, that's fine, that movie to exist, but other movies to exist where it's like, here's this queer character and that's not their storyline. Like they're living their life, because I'm sure you all know it's like queer people do things that aren't about them being queer. Like it's, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm a human and I do things. So I think just telling those other stories, and it's something in Shattered that I was like, yes, there's like a conversation that they have about, you know, knowing when they were queer, like that happens, but it's like, it's not about that. It's about, you know, this guy that they killed, and there's all this other stuff going on, and I want to see more of that, because I feel like it normalizes it, and that's what we need to do.
Precisely, yeah. And you know, that's why we decided to set up this film festival. We were tired of, like, you know, we've been to a few different LGBT like screenings, film nights, but, and you know, and not, this isn't all of them, but predominantly a lot of the stories were sadly often problematic, like quite so. Especially when it comes to things about like trans representation. And then we had issues with just the stories being those doom and gloom stories, because, you know, every lesbian has had like drug issues, or, you know, cheated on their partner with that man. It always happens, right?
I swear to God, it's always, I'm bi. It's always fucking like, oh, they cheated. Like, that's just how, you know, and I'm like, all right, let's, come on. let's get going. That's not how it is. So it's incredibly fascinating. That's the biggest thing for me. It's like, all right. And entering film festivals, I find ones that aren't specifically queer, there's different categories, and it's like thriller, crime, whatever, and then it's like LGBT, and it's like, okay, so like my film's not about that, but there are characters that are queer. Why is that? I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that. I appreciate that it's there, but it's also like, so what is that, like, does my film qualify because there's a queer character, or does it have to be about being in that community? Like, you know what I mean? It's, yeah,
I think
there's
that's a great point, Madison. And like, it's funny because recently, I think having queerness be secondary to the plot is so important. And I recently was in a meeting with an executive where I had a script about two friends who one just happened to be queer and the other one was straight. And the question was, why is one of them a lesbian? Like, why did you make that? And I'm like, because she just is. Like, they're just...
There doesn't need to be a reason. Exactly.
Because sometimes straight and queer people are friends. Like,
no, or like if there's only one queer person, it's like, no, we pack. We like, we form groups. There's not always just one.
It's like person days.
Exactly. Yeah, I've gotten that question before too. Like I feel like I haven't written something in a long time that didn't have a queer character, because I
write what you know.
Well, that's the thing. And, he was like, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. I was just curious. And I'm like, I don't know, because I'm queer and I just thought this character is queer. And
I thought this character could exist in the world. Outrageous. So, often many horror villains are coded as queer or feminized in some way, which can arguably in some instances be problematic. I'm thinking of the debates around characters such as Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs and Angela from Sleepaway Camp. Is it always problematic for marginalised groups to play villains and monsters, or is it okay for us to embrace the dark side and be our own villains and monsters? So that's going to go over to Karlee first.
Yeah. I think for me, the biggest thing is that the character has some depth to them. I don't think it's inherently problematic for like a villain to be queer coded, because then it's kind of like, well, queer people can be villainous. Like, I don't think there's necessarily an issue with that, but I think like I said, I think there just needs to be some more depth to it beyond just their queerness and villainy. If that made any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose it's the how you portray. And again, it's, who's behind the camera. Let's move on to January.
So I think it's fine. I personally love a queer villain, but it's only okay if we can also be heroes, if we can be sidekicks, if we can be best friends, if we can be love interests, if we can be all of those other spectrum of people as well as villains, then it's totally cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we want to be villains, right? We can be villains.
Fun.
But let's not just pigeonhole us to those roles. So yeah, fantastic answer. Thank you. Let's go over to Leila.
I pretty much agree with what's already been said. I just think it becomes problematic when we see the queer and feminized characters only as villains. So anyone can be a villain, and I think it'd be veering just kind of puritanical to go the other way and never see us as villains and monsters. And I love making everyone in the story queer in some way, so.
Aren't we all in some way? Okay, let's move on over to N.
Yeah, I really like how Leila and January put it. Like I always see myself gravitating towards the villain just because they're fun. But yeah, I do see an issue where like if the queer person is only ever the villain, that like other people could see queer people as the villain in real life, and I think that could be bad. So yeah, as long as they're also just people living their life and villains and heroes and all of the above as well, then that's great.
Yeah, it's but for some reason that made me think as well of like good old Disney villains, right? And how they're often queered, right? And of othered. So there's an interesting thing there where, you know, let's not pretend that Disney is this saintly company for a moment. And you know, I have, you know, especially that they're older films, like even just Little Mermaid, and you look at is it Ursula?
Mm-hmm.
Ursula, yeah. You know, she's a drag queen, right? She's this queer.
Fine.
Oh my God, she's incredible. And something in me questions, what were Disney's motives though? The only queer readings, well, not all the only queer readings that I get from Disney characters, most of them come from the villains. And what is Disney trying to teach kids? It's a very interesting cycle when you start looking at how these characters have been queered, and what that might mean. Let's move on over to Hannah.
Well, going off what you just said, it's also kind of like how have queer kids and queer audiences reclaimed those characters as well. I love Ursula. I love a queer villain. And it's kind of just like, oh, look, it backfired because we love these villains that you've created, because it's also like some of our earliest exposure to queered characters, I guess. But I do agree there needs to be a balance of representation for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Also, like with Silence of the Lambs and Sleepaway Camp, in your question, like there are interesting debates on whether or not the trans characters were actually trans, or if they were like, you know, Buffalo Bill it's mentioned half-assedly in the film. It doesn't do what it thinks it's doing, but and I love Silence of the Lambs, but it says like, oh, he thinks that he's trans, but he's not actually, and that's like a cause of his stress and whatever. So it's definitely like debatable. But also with the Sleepaway Camp sequels with Angela, they kind of changed her storyline a little bit, and her trans identity is not really mentioned. She fully assimilates as a woman, and then like, yeah, it's never really mentioned again in the series. So that's kind of interesting that they validate her gender identity as a woman. But yeah, again, definitely a balance.
Speaking of Angela, I find it with Sleepaway Camp, I find it interesting looking at it from a different angle and seeing it as a horror story about forced gendered stereotypes, because Angela isn't allowed to be themselves. They're told, they're made to be Angela, and it becomes quite an interesting case study when you see it from that angle as well. I don't know how I feel fully about that film, especially because of the almost kind of meme mentality about that reveal, you know. But again, that's what people have taken from it and turned it into. So can I blame the film for that? I don't know. But yeah, it's interesting.
And there's other parts in Sleepaway Camp that are really queer too. Like Angela's dad has a male partner at the beginning of the film that I missed on my first viewing. So I don't know if the filmmaker was queer. I don't know. There's definitely queer tones in that film though.
Yeah, definitely. I actually don't know. Now you've mentioned the filmmaker.
He made that movie, I'm pretty sure. He never made another movie after that.
Interesting.
But it's definitely, I mean, it shows the horror of being assigned a gender that doesn't sit right with you, you know,
Mhm.
like yes, it's definitely a problematic film and there's no denying that. But, you know, the horror that Angela's experiencing is essentially that of like when society assigns a gender to you that isn't correct. And that's not fair, you know, I think we've now realized that that's a huge problem.
Absolutely.
And everyone she killed was a jerk. Let's
Yeah.
be real. They all
True.
Very, very true. So, what horror tropes would you like to see banished forever? Feel free to talk about any harmful tropes to marginalised groups that we need to get rid of, or just give us a silly one that you're just fed up of seeing. And for that, we're going over to Madison first.
I think I said this earlier, but the gay best friend, I'm just like real tired of seeing it. And also like just making the main character like a white dude, a cis white dude, a straight cis white dude, and then having the best friend either be, you know, queer or a woman or black or whatever it may be. I think it's like, what are you saying again about the importance of that person, that they're just there to be, you know, the comic relief or the support? Not that there's anything wrong with a supporting character. Supporting characters are extremely important. But if the lead is always, you know, a man, it's like, okay, well, they're not that important. And I see this meme all the time. It's like, I forget what it is, but it's like, I'm the main character. It's like people like, do you see yourself as the main character in the story? And looking at younger queer people, if you're only seeing yourself as the sidekick or like in this dark light and struggling, it's like, that's what you're showing younger queer kids, and that's what you're teaching them that they're the sidekick, they're not important, they're whatever. So I think it's just like, come on, we've done it enough. Like let's put that one to rest.
Absolutely. And what you said there, you know, it makes me think of often when we have like queer characters or women or black characters, what have you, these characters are often used to progress the main cis het white man's story, and it's like, come on, like we're not just a little piece, like we have our own lives.
With a whole meal.
Cheers out.
Yeah, seriously, yeah.
Okay, let's move that question on to N, please.
I guess the only thing that really, or not the only thing, but the thing that came to my mind first was like, you have a show or movie and the single queer character gets like booted off or killed off or something like that, and it's like everyone else is straight and then the one queer character gone, no more. I don't want that anymore. Like,
and often it's those queer characters that are in the marketing material, right? Bit of queer baiting, trying to reel us in, and then we start watching like, thanks.
yeah, like if they're gone in the first 5 minutes, I'm like, why am I watching this movie?
What's the point?
Yeah, it's just kind of tiring seeing that happen like all the time, and it's refreshing to see a series where like they last until the end, or like they're all queer, so it doesn't really matter, or something like that. But,
yeah, fantastic, thank you. Let's move on to let's go with Hannah.
I like a lot of tropes because I think they're fun to incorporate and then subvert. When you guys see our movie, you'll pick up on that. But definitely like the token black friend that's always killed first, you know, just any tokenization of a character, for sure. We can do away with that.
Throw it in the bin. And let's go over to January.
So I'm going to say one, and then I'm going to add a caveat to that because I don't totally want to get rid of it. But I am really tired of seeing rape and sexual assault as a plot device that isn't actually unpacked and explored. So therefore my caveat is, if it is unpacked and explored, then that's a powerful story to tell. But I hate when it's just like this kind of one-off thing to explain why a character's going through a bad time. And, you know, we kind of, don't like unpack what's really going on in that. So.
Yeah, I was actually having this conversation with a friend earlier today, well, yesterday, I suppose now, because it's the early hours. But yeah, it's the difference between having sexual assault in a film, especially horror, and then what happens after that. What does that lead character, hopefully a lead character, go through? What moves do they make next? And is the outcome of that going to be worth what we had to see as an audience?
And that's the thing. And when it's just used for shock value or to like terrorize women or something like that, and I'm like, that's just not cool. You know what I mean? If you actually want to make a comment on this issue, then make a comment on it, but don't just use it as like something gross and, you know,
gratuitous. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you very much. Karlee.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the like POC queer sidekick trope. I think and that's just in film in general, not even specific to horror, but that's definitely my most like pet peeve trope that I see all the time. But I'm kind of with Hannah where I do really love tropes, and I love especially since, you know, like the 90s or whenever, like we've really started to kind of have that trend of we're like flipping tropes on their heads, which I think is just really fun. I really enjoy that. But yeah, I would also really agree with January. I'm not a big fan of just over sexualization in horror in general. The stuff that really bothers me is like the 80s, just like gratuitous like frontal nudity or like sex scenes that just don't need to be there. They just don't add anything, and they're just total, you know, it's just for the male viewers, like obviously, or it was intended to be at the time that it was made, at least. Maybe not so much now, but yeah.
I think
now we can all enjoy it.
yeah. I just don't know if we were the intended audience.
I think I might be wrong again, but I think I saw or read somewhere that Sigourney Weaver in Alien, originally there was supposed to be a sex scene in Alien, and she basically turned around and went, "There's an alien on the ship, chasing people around, killing everyone off. Why would anyone be having sex?"
Not wrong.
You never know, all that adrenaline, you never know what could happen.
Gotta get it out somehow. Anyway, yeah, thank you so much for your time tonight, folks. It's been a real pleasure talking with you all. And I hope you all enjoy the festival.
Yay.
I'm so excited to watch everyone's stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.